Hello there, mere mortals, and welcome to my presentation on Gioacchino Rossini. I am your host, Tristan Andrew. You may be asking why I would place two of Rossini's iconic opera overtures in a Halloween playlist. Well, they may surprise you. So, listen closely, and you will understand what I am talking about. What is an overture, anyway? The term overture derives from a French word meaning opening, ouverture, and was, in art music, an instrumental introduction to a ballet, opera, or oratorio in the 17th century. Prior to the 18th century, the symphony and the overture were almost interchangeable, with overtures being extracted from operas to serve as standalone instrumental works, and symphonies being tagged to the front of operas as overtures. By the end of the 18th century, opera overtures were already beginning to be performed as separate items in the concert hall. These concert overtures were intended specifically as an individual concert piece, without reference to a stage performance. Concert overtures were generally based on some literary theme and began to appear early in the Romantic era. Initially, composers such as Ludwig van Beethoven and Felix Mendelssohn composed overtures which were independent, self-existing instrumental programmatic works that foreshadowed genres such as the symphonic poem, while other composers did create such programmatic works. Mendelssohn's 1826 overture, A Midsummer Night's Dream, is generally regarded as the first concert overture. And yet, more variations appear on this opening theme. In the 1850s, the concert overture began to be supplanted by the symphonic poem, a form devised by Hungarian composer Franz Liszt that began as dramatic overtures. The distinction between the two genres was the freedom to mold the musical form according to external programmatic requirements. The symphonic poem became the preferred form for the more progressive composers such as César Franck, Camille Saint-Saëns, Richard Strauss, Alexander Scriabin, and Arnold Schoenberg. More conservative composers like Anton Rubinstein, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, Johannes Brahms, Robert Schumann, and Arthur Sullivan remained faithful to the overture. By the 20th century, the distinction had largely disappeared. In fact, in motion pictures, an overture is a piece of music setting the mood for the film before the opening credits start. Just as in operatic overtures, you get a sense of the tone of the film by the emotional impact of the overtures. The concert form has come to include what modern listeners sometimes think of as a mashup or medley. Of course, our current concert overtures are far more artful than the typical montage of popular forms. But this presentation is going to be looking at opera overtures, specifically those created by the classical era's Gioacchino Rossini. So, where do the holidays come into overtures? My interest in art music history coincided with an interest in the origins of various holiday traditions that I developed in my childhood. In time, I became less concerned with traditions and more fascinated with the idea that various pieces of art music either had roots in holiday celebrations or could be somehow associated with a holiday due to changing perceptions of the musical work. I will be focusing on the holiday of Halloween and determining which of Rossini's overtures are best suited to this deliciously dark holiday. Halloween goes beyond monsters and magic. We also think of death, destiny, and a whole range of supernatural topics as part of Halloween. This would include all creatures and characters that appear in mythology and cultural myths themselves. When we think of Halloween-related concepts, we find an enormous body of art music that we can associate with our favorite scary holiday. Take, for instance, Anatoly Yadov's triptych featuring Baba Yaga and Kikimora. Edvard Grieg's first suite to Per Gent. Jean Sibelius's Tapiola. Paul Dukas, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Hector Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique. Franz Liszt's Totentanz. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. Sergei Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. Igor Stravinsky's The Firebird. And so on. It is not surprising that the most intensely emotional and sweeping art music form, opera, should have something to say about Halloween concepts. That is special indeed. Our examples abound, such as Richard Wagner's Ring of the Nibelung. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's Magic Flute. Or Giuseppe Verdi's Aida. But this presentation is looking only at overtures. So, of course, we are looking at Rossini. Gioacchino Antonio Rossini, born in 1782 and dying in 1868, was a contemporary of Ludwig van Beethoven. In their lifetime, it was Rossini who was considered more popular and was definitely financially more successful. When we think of Rossini, we tend to think of comedy and over-the-top theatrical works. His comedic masterpieces, including The Italian Girl in Algiers, Thieving Magpie, La Cenerentola, an adaptation of the fairy tale Cinderella, and perhaps his most iconic work, The Barber of Seville. Figaro, 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 are regarded as cornerstones of the genre, along with works by Mozart and Verdi. He was revered from the time he was a teenager until his death. The catalog of work Rossini had written at the time of his retirement included 32 operas, 2 symphonies, numerous cantatas, and a handful of oratorios and chamber music pieces. He spent the remaining years of his life writing sacred music, as well as delectable miniatures for both piano and voice, some of which he called Sins of My Old Age. Luckily for the Halloween playlist, despite its reputation for lightness and accessibility, Rossini's music has a complexity that does not shy away from evoking darker currents. The overture from Rossini's 1817 opera, The Thieving Magpie, opens with a few intensifying rolls on the snare drum. The instrument that is perhaps the star of the show in this piece. Rossini uses the snare drum to highlight one of the opera's characters, returning from the war, a military hero. Later in the opera, the snare drum symbolizes the march to the scaffold for a young girl accused of stealing a spoon when we, the all-knowing audience, are aware that the bird was the thief. Bringing a traditional militaristic sound into the orchestra beautified it, in some sense, and allowed the drum to have an artfulness of its own. The overture to The Thieving Magpie is a staple of the curtain raiser slot in symphonic concerts. It is chock full of the colorful orchestral strokes that populate the whole group of Rossini overtures. I've already mentioned the drum rolls at the very start that add military color and are just long enough to seem a bit ominous. They introduce an opera designated a melodrama that shades comic elements with darker overtones. When we remember that the plot of a servant girl accused of stealing some silverware, with which the magpie of the title has actually been absconded from its nest, is taken from a true story in which a young woman was actually put to death for the bird's crime. We get a chill that is not too far removed from Halloween fears. This overture neatly melds episodic color with the weightier drama of symphonic sonata form. It features a parade of effects and lovely themes. Following those martial drums, there is an especially famous theme introduced by an oboe and later a clarinet that anticipate the characters and action to come. Then, following a spectacular crescendo, which means the music gets louder and louder and louder and louder, Rossini reworks several of these themes in a mini-development section. The overture to The Thieving Magpie is atypical in its thematic links to the following opera. Rossini, one of music's great adherents of the reuse and recycle school, often made the same overture do service for 2 or even more operas at this early stage in his career. The special care he took with this one shows not just in the links between overture and staged scenes, but in the vividness and excitement of the whole. The overture's suggestion of conflict and social tension earns it a place in the Halloween playlist, as well as being famously used to bizarre and dramatic effect in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. It was also referenced by Haruki Murakami in his work The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. It is this theme introduced by the oboe that represents the image of the opera's main subject, a devilishly clear thieving magpie. The overture from Rossini's final opera from 1829, William Tell, was written when he had retired to France. In it, he paints a musical picture of life in the Swiss Alps, including a storm scene that clearly suggests a landscape. This overture is not only a concert favorite, but an unmistakable reflection and continuation of Beethoven's heroic ideal. While I plan to make an argument for this being a Halloween piece, it also definitely serves as a crossover with Earth Day. We can see elements in the early sections that are reminiscent of Beethoven's Symphony No. 6, the Pastoral Symphony. Rossini's oversized spectacle, William Tell, is not widely performed these days, but the famous overture lives on in countless orchestral performances, television reruns, and whistled renditions of its final sections. Sometimes even that final section is excerpted from its surroundings, but listeners to such performances miss the scope and variety of color that give the overture its power. It begins with a celebrated quiet section for cellos and basses, representing a peaceful sunrise in Switzerland. A storm then breaks out, followed by a Rance de Vache, a wonderful duet between flute and cor anglais, English horn, representing the pastoral scenes of mountain meadows. The famous trumpet call heralds the patriotic Swiss army and leads to the equally famous double-time gallop, used as the theme to the Lone Ranger program on radio and television. This particular overture has particular significance to Rossini's place in art music history. Partly because he stopped composing while still a young man, and partly because of his contemporaneity with the late Beethoven and Franz Schubert. One tends to think of Rossini as a musical conservative whose music harked back to a classical ideal of natural melody. Yet, William Tell was, in many ways, the first grand opera, and its overture, unprecedented in its time, was recognized as a cornerstone of the orchestral playlist well before the first Hollywood cowboy rode into the studio. In its vivid programmatic qualities, and in its use of a rousing popular dance, the gallop, the overture, chestnut though it may be to us, was once well ahead of its time. Hungarian composer Franz Liszt prepared a piano transcription of the overture in 1838, which became a staple of his concert repertoire. There are also transcriptions by other composers, including versions by Louis Gottschalk for 2 and 4 pianos, and a duet for piano and violin. The William Tell Overture demonstrates great music's ability to adapt to changing times. There has been repeated use, and sometimes parody, of parts of this overture in both classical music and popular media. It was the theme music for The Lone Ranger in radio, television, and film, and has become widely associated with horseback riding as a result. 2 different parts were used as theme music for the British television series The Adventures of William Tell, the 4th part in the UK, and the 3rd part rearranged as a stirring march in the US. And it was used in the children's I Love Toy Trains video franchise. The music's pace and energy, set up by the now familiar sense of conflict and social tension, the foreboding hint of death, earns it a place on our Halloween playlist. This also appears in the Disney Little Einsteins episodes Superfast and the Great Sky Race rematch, but the Halloween element is lost in these episodes. Rossini's fame as an opera composer is well deserved, but it is his overtures that demonstrate his mastery of orchestration and dramatic evocation. I think it is quite fair to refer to him as the king of the opera overture. The 2 works I have included here are filled with drama and dark overtones, even if the operas themselves are not necessarily a good fit for our Halloween playlist. I hope I have convinced you, however, that the overtures to The Thieving Magpie and William Tell have earned a place on that playlist. So ends our survey on Rossini's Halloween overtures. I hope you enjoyed them and keep them in mind every Halloween. Please remember to subscribe, comment, and keep listening. Thanks for watching. This is Tristan Andrew, signing off.